Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Easy EdTech Podcast. My name is Monica Burns, and I am so glad that you're here to join me today. If you want to make the most of education technology, aka EdTech, well, you are in the right place. My goal has always been to help make EdTech easier and give you ideas you can try yourself, share with a colleague, or bookmark for later in the school year. Every Tuesday here on the Easy EdTech Podcast, you'll hear stories from my time in the classroom, the work I do now with schools and districts, and my travels to different EdTech events. Get ready for solo episodes where I share some quick tips and stories, and interviews full of practical ideas and stories from new guests each month. If we mention something you'd like to check out, make sure to click the link. You'll find it in the episode description or the summary area where you're listening to this podcast, or you can find every episode and all of the resources we mention by going to classtechtips.com/podcast, or by going to classtechtips.com and just clicking on the Easy EdTech Podcast button at the top of the page. This episode is sponsored by LitWorld, a nonprofit organization dedicated to strengthening kids and communities through the power of stories. Their award-winning, child-centered programs such as Lit Camp and Lit Club are designed to develop social-emotional learning in every child. These programs encourage self-expression, community, and confidence, using literacy as a tool and pathway for self-empowerment. LitWorld is also the founder of World Read Aloud Day, a worldwide celebration of the power of reading aloud to create community and amplify new stories, and to advocate for literacy as a foundational human right. On February 5th, 2025, LitWorld invites you to celebrate World Read Aloud Day's 15th anniversary. Head on over to www.worldreadaloudday.org to access free resources and activities to make the most of this joyful day with your classroom and community. Hello there, and welcome to episode 300 of the Easy EdTech Podcast. Today's episode is 13 things I've learned from recording 300 podcast episodes. And let me tell you, the idea of having a podcast in the first place, let alone getting to 300 episodes, is just absolutely wild. If you've been here since the beginning, then you know I launched the Easy EdTech Podcast in March of 2019. So we're almost coming up on 6 years. I launched it on my birthday week, the first week of March, dropping a couple episodes all at once, which is how they meaning podcast experts recommend you getting started, and then having a new episode just about every Tuesday since then. In the early days, I skipped some holidays like 4th of July or Christmas. This is going live on New Year's Eve, but even though I'm not recording it for you on New Year's Eve, I'm doing this one earlier in December, right? I've kept it pretty consistent whether there's a holiday or not, especially the past few years. Now, if you've been listening closely, you might say, Monica, I think you have more than 300 episodes. And you're right. This is the 300th episode for my Tuesday episodes. I've snuck in some bonus episodes, a couple dozen of them over the past few years. So this might actually be hitting publish more like on 341 or something like that, but I only number the Tuesday episodes. Those bonuses that used to go live on Sundays, now every couple Fridays I'll do one. Don't have numbers, so if we're keeping count with just Tuesdays, then yep, this is episode 300. So I thought it would be fun to come on today for a solo episode to talk about a few things, 13 things I've learned from recording these 300 plus episodes over the past almost 6 years. So let's jump into this list together with these 13 things that might just be interesting or might be helpful if you listen to or are creating podcasts of your own. First up is consistency, and consistency is key. That's one thing I've learned from the start of recording a podcast. I knew that if I was going to do this, I wanted to have a consistent cadence or release schedule, similar to the consistent blog posts that I publish every week. And one of my big strategies for doing this is preparing ahead of time. I've actually got that listed as a separate thing on the list, so I'll talk about that in a moment. But consistency and staying consistent with the release schedule really helps people know that they can expect new content each week. If you are dropping or releasing content without a clear frequency or schedule, it can be hard to expect something to pop up in your feed, and it can be easy to forget that something even exists. So one thing I've learned is that consistency is really helpful to make sure that episodes go out. I don't think we've missed one Tuesday. Sometimes they come a bit later in the day, but usually I try and post them first thing so that if you are East Coast, moving west, they'll be waiting for you on your Tuesday morning commute. Number 2 is it's okay to start small. That's one big thing I learned right from the beginning. In the early episodes, I was comfortable with kind of talking into a void, not really being sure if anyone would listen or who exactly was listening. Even though I was watching the metrics and seeing the podcast listener numbers and download numbers grow, right, I had to really accept the fact that it was okay to start small. When I started, I just had me, right? Like this solo episode. Now I switch it up with interviews and solo episodes over the course of the month. And really understanding that it was okay to start small was a big thing that I learned, particularly because when I started this, my blog, Class Tech Tips, was going and going, right? It had already been about 5 years of me having that, or more, 7 years or so of having the blog. So it's tempting to bite off a lot, right? Especially if you're doing things in other spaces that are feeling good. But remembering that it's okay to start small was one big thing I've learned. Number 3 is that it's okay to pivot or make some changes. As much as I like to keep things consistent with those Tuesday episodes, I've definitely made some changes along the way. One big way is switching from just solo episodes, which was basically the whole first year of the podcast, to having guests on, even inviting people back for a second time, or changing up some tools that we use, like the transcription service so that you can read the transcript. I've changed up or pivoted from one platform to another a couple times. So sometimes those pivots came because of external factors. Like when I started the podcast and was just doing solo episodes, it was really because I was traveling like crazy bonkers, and I knew that I would be really hard for me to schedule guests because my schedule was just really crazy. But then when COVID happened and I was working from home and doing a lot more webinars with educators, I had a more, I don't want to say flexible schedule, but I had a schedule where I was able to fit things in or be more available for other people's schedule challenges. And so that's when it became clear to me that I really could have other people join and that I really loved talking to other people about different topics. So number 3 of the things I've learned is that it is okay to pivot. Number 4 is to prepare but stay flexible. I send over questions to guests before they join me on the podcast. I like to have an outline to make sure I hit some key points that I want to talk to that person about. But sometimes great things happen from more unplanned moments. Like we start talking about a whole bunch of things, and then I cut out a couple questions to make sure we stay, under half an hour for the full episode. Or sometimes someone mentions something and I thought our whole episode was going to be about one topic, like that's what I prepped for, but then we start talking about something totally different. So I change up the title or what I thought the focus might be. So number 4 is prepare, but stay flexible. Number 5 is clear communication helps guests prepare. So sharing those questions, sharing instructions like we are not going to be on video, or try to find a place where you can have an external mic, or all right, this is how long it's going to take for us to jump on, or make sure you double check that I got your books right so I can link out to them. So being really clear ahead of time with those expectations, I think has made things smoother for me and for guests because they just know what to expect. Number 6 is listen to your listeners. Audience recommendations are super helpful. And although I sometimes get emails about this, some of my favorite moments at a conference are when people come up and tell me that they listen to the podcast, because not only do I get to say like, oh, great, like there's a real person listening, not just a number, right? But that person sometimes will give me some feedback like, I really loved this topic, or I wish you talked more about this topic, or I think this person would make a great guest. So listening to listeners has been a huge thing I've learned right from the beginning. Number 7 is titles matter. Although I try to stay away from super clickbaity titles, like those YouTube videos that sometimes get me because the title is so enticing. Having a clear title, something that's a little catchy, can help people find the episode, or I should say, not just find the episode, but decide that they want to explore it. I link my podcast in the newsletter that I send out every Monday. So you get that in your inbox with the link and you can decide, do I want to listen or do I want to skip this week? And so that I think can help people decide, right, having a nice, clear title. I also try to make sure that I've got titles that have keywords inside of it so that it's easier to find. Like if I'm doing one on winter activities, right? I want to make sure that it's clear. So if someone Googles that topic, they're able to find it. Number 8 on the list is promotion doesn't stop at publishing. So when we hit publish for the episodes, I say we because there's folks that help out to make sure that I get all of the prep work done, that all the editing takes place, right? So when we hit publish on the episodes, it's not over then, right? I don't just hope that you find it on your Spotify feed. I try to share it in lots of places, like sharing quotes from a guest on Instagram, posting it on LinkedIn or Blue Sky to make sure people can find it even after the episode goes live. Number 9 on the things I've learned from recording over 300 podcast episodes is to keep it short and sweet. So these episodes, usually the solo episodes, are a little bit shorter, but even my interview ones, I try to keep under a half an hour so that you can listen to it in one shot, right? Like all at once, as opposed to something you might have to break up over the course of the day or remember to come back to. That way, if you are busy on the move, you can get everything you need right in that under 30 minutes. Now, I have some friends who are big with audiobooks. I love audiobooks too, but they listen to them like on 1.5 or 2 times. And I just can't wrap my head around that. I can barely listen to an audiobook at like 1.2, maybe 1.3, depending on a narrator. And even then I need to make sure I'm really paying attention. So I don't listen to podcasts on a faster speed typically. I usually keep it at 1 time speed. But even if you are feeling like the 25 minutes-ish for my typical episodes is a little bit long, you could always do the 1.1 or 1.2 or something to speed it up a bit. Number 10 is to adapt to listener preferences. If there's something that I see, like I notice that people are listening to this mostly on one platform or another, like I can watch that, then I might decide that when I share an episode on social, that I want to make sure I have it, I'm sharing the Spotify link a little bit more. But one big thing I've been listening to in terms of listener preferences is video. And so I've got some video content that I've recorded. It's actually going to go out exclusively on a sponsors platform. So in January and February, you're going to see some bonus episodes with guests that you've seen on the podcast or heard on the podcast before, and some new guests. And I recorded videos with them. And so you'll get audio on my podcast feed, on my Easy EdTech podcast feed, but then you'll get video on our sponsors video like feed, like YouTube. So I'll send all the links out to that. But that's one thing I've been listening to is like how people prefer to engage with podcasts, and one thing we're looking at. Number 11 is to batch record episodes to save time. This is one big thing I've learned, that if I can record multiple episodes in one sitting, it keeps our production process much smoother. So what does this look like? Well, sometimes it means that I've got 2 or 3 solo episodes. They're like 15 or 20 minutes each, and I'll do them all together on one morning or afternoon. And so that way I'll get a couple weeks of content done right then. Or I usually go in bursts of recording guest interviews. So I will record maybe not all in the same day, back to back to back, but like one week I'll record 5 or 6 interviews, and that will cover us for a month or 2. So batch recording has been a big thing I've learned that saves me lots of times. Number 12 on our list, we're almost towards the end here, is to celebrate milestones with your audience. And that's what we're doing with this episode. I've done it before. I think I did it for the 100th episode, right? Just really taking a moment to pause and maybe do something a little different, like this 300th episode. And the very last thing on our list of 13 is to always keep learning. That's one thing I've learned from recording these episodes, is that whether there's a new tool, whether there's a new technique, a new trend in podcast recording, I try my best to follow other podcasters. I listen to oodles of podcasts myself that have nothing to do with education or marketing or podcasting, but I listen and I try and notice what other people are doing on a sports or current events or reality TV show recap podcast I listen to. And then I follow some newsletters of podcasters just to see what they're excited about. So there you have it, 13 things I've learned from recording 300 podcast episodes. Let's run down the list of 13. We usually have my 3 or 4 key points from the episode, but this one's a little bit different. Let's run down our list of 13. Consistency is key. It's okay to start small. It's okay to pivot. Prepare, but stay flexible. Clear communication helps guests prepare. Audience recommendations are super helpful. Choose great titles. Promote after publishing. Keep it short and sweet. Adapt to listener preferences. Save time with batch recording. Celebrate milestones like this 300th episode. And always keep learning. Remember, you can find the show notes and the full list of all the resources that I mentioned in today's episode by heading to classtechtips.com and finding episode 300. Thank you to Lit World, founders of World Read Aloud Day, for sponsoring this episode. Get ready to celebrate World Read Aloud Day on February 5th, 2025 by heading over to www.worldreadaloudday.org to access free resources and activities. Thank you for listening to this new episode of the Easy EdTech Podcast. I love creating new episodes for you each week, but I could use a bit of help spreading the word about the podcast. Can you leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app? Spotify will let you tap on the stars, and Apple Podcasts will let you tap on the stars and leave a 1 or 2 sentence review. Thank you so much for taking this extra step. It helps other educators find episodes like this one when they're searching for EdTech tips.